So welcome and good morning or evening to all of our guests, students, faculty, alumni, colleagues, and friends. My name is Giovanni Santamaria. I'm the chair of the School of Architecture and Design at New York Tech, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you to this event on behalf of our Dean, Maria Perbellini. New York Institute of Technology School of Architecture and Design is participating through multiple venues to the 17th International Architecture Exhibition, Venice Biennial 2021. Some of the work from our student is in fact exhibited in the pavilion, Italian pavilion titled Resilient Communities, curated by Alessandro Melis in the section Architecture as Caregiver, curated by our Dean Perbellini. Today's event is also part of a virtual pavilion, Italian pavilion, City X Venice, curated by Tom Kovac and Alessandro Melis, with the creative director, Maria Perbellini. The theme of our lecture series is a correlated crisis for this year. 2020 marked a critical year in which environmental, health, economic, and social crises had become correlated, bringing forth the emergence of unforeseen global issues to be addressed with urgency. The summer and fall 2020-21 lecture and event series at the School of Architecture and Design at the New York Institute of Technology creates opportunities to discuss how architecture, design, and urbanism can disclose implicit parameters and activate structural transformation in our ecological, social, and built environment. From how reality is measured and validated to automation and computational thinking, the series aims to question possibilities for disciplinary action. I would like to welcome again all of you and thank for joining us today. And will now leave the floor to our Associate Professor Nader Vasugian.
Thank you, Giovanni, and thank you for the introduction. I am thrilled and honored to help moderate over this this discussion we're going to be having today with Yanis Varoufakis and with Peggy Deemer, and in collaboration with my colleague Hyunte Young. Before we get started with the discussion, I'd like to just introduce our two distinguished guests. I think they both count among the most prominent and thoughtful intellectuals of the left today, intellectuals period in my mind. For those of you who don't know, Yanis Varoufakis is currently a member of parliament in Greece, in addition to being a professor of economics at the University of Athens. He was economic minister of Greece in 2015, which is how I got to know him and his work. He is co-founder of DM25, an international organization that is calling for the democratization of the European Union. He's also co-founder of Progressive International, which aims to fight authoritarian nationalism. I can't think of a more timely thing to be starting today. He just published another now, which is very, I think, fascinating because he's sort of stepping out of the dismal science into something that we know about, a thing or two about, which is how to dream. So we're excited to hear about that too. Our other guest today is Peggy Deemer, who I think has been an extraordinary catalyst for progressive thought in architecture for many decades. She is now an emeritus professor of architecture at Yale University. She has edited a number of books, which I continue to use in my seminars, including The Architecture as Worker and Architecture and Capitalism. And I teach her work every semester, which I think I pointed out, which I think I didn't fail to mention when we spoke over the phone. I think that this discussion about architecture and capitalism is incredibly timely for us living here in the United States, because as many of you are aware, Congress just passed the $1 trillion infrastructure bill with resounding bipartisan support, which surprised me given the current state of political affairs in this country. So I thought that the first thing that we can, I'd love to hear about, and I think many of our students would love to hear about, are some of your thoughts about what's happening in terms of the infrastructure debate today, either in the United States and or around the world, in Europe, and what you think it all means and how we can interpret it. So perhaps we'll start with you, Yanis, if that's okay.
if you don't mind being depressed by my answer. Well, what we had in Congress was the continuation and the turbocharging of corrupt politics. The idea was, remember, and this is what my friend Bernie was meant to push through the Congress, was a deal that would comprise two legs. One would be the infrastructure bill that the Republicans wanted as well. And the second one was the Build Back Better green transition program of something approximating 3.5 trillion. At least that was what the Biden administration was telling us. And what happened in the end was, instead of seeing through these two pillars simultaneously, which was the condition that was laid down by the progressives in Congress. You want the big bucks to be spent on roads, on airports, and all the things that those who want to continue the current business as usual fossil fuel based model. You want, this infrastructure to be renewed. Sure, why not, shore up a bridge before it collapses? You will need to pay for the transition, for the Green New Deal, which is the second package. In the end, Nancy Pelosi broke the deal with the progressives and decoupled the two. Regarding the first pillar, effectively, they managed to throw out all the important green projects and to replace them by brown or black projects. That has gone through with bipartisan support. And the second one has been put on the back burner. So, same old. We live in an oligarchic global regime that follows the dictum that to make sure that nothing changes, everything must change. So they have no compunction whatsoever doing incredibly radical things like printing trillions of dollars. The G7 central banks, since the beginning of the pandemic, have been counting almost on a daily basis. They have printed $10 trillion, $10,000 billion, the G7 central banks. Let me put this in context. According to the International Monetary Fund, to vaccinate the whole world, it would take 50. So they printed 10,000, 50 of that would have vaccinated the whole world. They're not doing that. But they're giving all that money to their friends in the financial sector, the City of London, Wall Street, of course, and Frankfurt, and blah, 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 right? And, they then lend it to large corporations.
Wait us a while. All right.
Hello. Either they lend it to people who are destroying the planet, or they lend it to corporations that go to the New York Stock Exchange, buy back their own shares, push the share price up. Financial markets decouple, doing fantastically from the rest of the world, from really existing capitalism even. I told you, I warned you. You want me to answer? You'll get depressed.
Thank you.
As for Europe, don't get me started on Europe. Europe is a stupid continent. You Americans.
I'm going to have a follow-up question, but let's hear.
We are the stupid continent over here. Continent, right?
Peggy.
I won't disagree with anything that Yanis said. And Yanis, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be in this discussion with you. So I'm very honored. But I will just maybe add some other points to that main point. One is that the decoupling, I think, has ideological consequences, which I think are deeply problematic. It basically indicates that hard stuff we can agree with, the brown stuff, but things that are more ephemeral and let's just say long-term, less visible, are the things that we can't deal with. And so that emphasis on the physical, I think, just goes into the general public's head and is deeply problematic. But besides that decoupling, I think there's a decoupling from the idea of infrastructure as something that is, again, not physical and maybe not, and as I was saying, divorced from climate justice, but from social justice. The fact that it threw out extensions for Medicaid and threw out pay for childcare and elderly care. And it's remarkable. Nothing about housing. I mean, again, the definition of infrastructure is so reduced that the public, I think, doesn't get the full picture. But I know part of it is also, I think, the lessons that we should have learned from Obama's Recovery Act, which I think everyone thinks was maybe a political failure because it was less than half as much as what it should be. And so it fits into a discussion is like, it didn't work. And so the Republicans can say it didn't work. Well, it didn't work because the Republicans stopped it from being the full package that it should be. And so again, I feel like the acceptance of this kind of half of what it should be, and the change of the name, by the way, when it went from being the American Jobs Plan, that's something different than the infrastructure plan. All of those things play into, I mean, the kind of reduction play into a scenario that I think the Republicans are just poised to take advantage of. And that's deeply problematic. I can go on about how architects can maybe play into this, but I think that might be part of the second conversation. So,
well, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, one of the provisions of the bill that just passed represents the largest public investment in Amtrak, our rail infra line here in the U.S. I'm not sure if it's public or private. I think it's private. That we've seen since it was formed in 1971.
But that's not hard. Give them $10. This is the largest investment in Amtrak in the history of Amtrak. I mean, it's such a ramshackle enterprise. Allow me, Nader, to butt in on that.
Please.
Beijing, when the financial collapse took place in 2008, right? They had 0 miles or kilometers of super fast railways. Within 5 years, they had 16,000 miles of them, of trains doing 210 miles an hour. Okay, now compare and contrast this kind of investment with what went to that on this particular bill. It's tokenism. I'm glad it's there, but it's tokenistic. Instead of New York, Boston being 24 hours, it's going to be 22 hours on a good day. I'm exaggerating to make a point.
Yeah, of course.
By the way, Peggy, it's great to be on the same Zoom with you. It's a great pleasure.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, just to say, what Amtrak got is half of what Biden thought it should get. I mean, again, when we're talking about a bar that is so low, that anything looks kind of good, that we've given something, misses the larger economic package about what really needs to happen in order to make a sustainable, just society. I mean, it's just catch up from such a low bar.
So you don't see this as a kind of systemic shift? In other words, an investment in mass transit?
No, Please. It isn't. It really isn't. If that $3.5 trillion package had gone through, the second package, then we would be talking some serious business there. But it is not going through. And I very much fear that the reason why the conservative Democrats acquiesced to this being discussed was because they knew they would kill it on the floor of the House.
Anything you want to add, Peggy?
Well, I'm just going to repeat the point that I made, is like when the physical infrastructure is divorced from the social infrastructure and climate justice infrastructure, the message is inherently problematic. It misses the point about why we actually need to invest in the physical infrastructure, all the injustices that it is just the symptom of. So, yeah, it makes me sad. I mean, I also feel like we could be discussing Biden in all of this, because I know that Yanis is, has very much indicated that Biden is, part of the problem, that he's just going along with the central banks and the business people. I tend to be slightly more sympathetic about what Biden is up against, and I think that's part of, Nader, what you're trying to emphasize is kind of like, we did get something and we should be proud that we did, but it's within such a limited framework. that we have to congratulate ourselves in, that it just seems as depressing as it is optimistic.
So, but we can't be optimistic that this second bill is going to pass, the so-called social infrastructure.
No, it was designed to fail from day one. Very much fear. Look, Peggy, look, okay, let me grant that Biden seems to me better as president than I had predicted. So I will give you that much. But given my very low expectations at the beginning, that's not saying a great deal. But besides that, it doesn't really matter what I think. What I do think is important is, from an American political history perspective, when he came out with his pronouncements of the two packages, and in particular, and that's something I grant him as important, his support of unionization. The idea that he would penalize companies that are not unionizing when it comes to electric cars, his support of the unionization drive in various factories, left, right, and center in the United States, that's a good thing. But to take all this and to make the analogy with Roosevelt is a major category error, I think. And it's a category error, not just a question of personal judgment, because Roosevelt was also a conservative patrician, who realized that capitalism was on its deathbed unless some serious injections were delivered. But there were two dimensions to the New Deal. The first one was, yes, using US Treasury bills, using the Federal Reserve to press into the service of the many of jobs, whatever liquidity there was, whatever money there was. And in that is close to the pronouncements by Biden. So Biden did that, or tried to, or said he tried, right? So let's, take him on good faith that he wanted to be Roosevelt in that regard. But there was a second dimension what Roosevelt did, which is to antagonize the banks. The bankers, not the banks, the bankers, which is to effectively eliminate Wall Street, not just by closing down the banks, but taking control of the banking system, nationalizing to all intents and purposes, the banking system. That is the great difference. That is the great difference between both Obama and Biden on the one hand, and Roosevelt on the other hand. Obama and Biden were in the pockets of Wall Street. They never antagonized them, they never intended to. And you can tell that because we've been now speaking for 20 minutes about fiscal policy. We've been talking about what goes through Congress. We have not spoken about what the Federal Reserve is doing. The Federal Reserve, without approval from Congress, from the Senate, from even without people actually knowing, under Obama, remember, there was this huge hoopla about the 750, 800 billion of the Obama stimulus program. And the Republicans were saying, oh, this is a huge amount of money and so on. Nobody really discussed the fact that Larry Summers and Tim Geithner, on the instructions of Obama or with his acquiescence, printed $14 trillion to save the derivatives market. That wasn't even discussed in the media. 15 trillion. And that's how Wall Street survived and continued to be the leading voice and leading force in developing our future or our present. And Biden has said nothing about this. Think about it. Trump was the first one who started giving money away, money that the Fed printed, that he sent to people's homes. Now, why is the Democratic Party discussing a basic income to be financed not through taxation, not through Congress, but through the Fed? Why must we accept, without even discussion, that the Fed takes money, gives it to the Bank of America, the Bank of America gives it to Apple. Apple doesn't need it because it's sitting on a stash of $200 billion of savings, but they take the Fed money and they go to the stock exchange and they buy Apple shares. Why are we accepting that? Why not use this money to fund the Green Union, the Green Energy Union that the North Americas need, not just for the United States, but for Canada and Mexico and Latin America as well? Huh? Why are we not even discussing that? Because we accepted their agenda.
Peggy, do you want to chime in?
I mean, I can't disagree. But it makes me think about other things, Giannis, that you have linked that thought to. And one is that if it's a mistake to link what Biden is doing with FDR and the New Deal, but the more analogous thing is to link him to the LBJ and the Great Society, and then you're pointing out that the difference there is that LBJ was a politician operating in a political climate where bullying and compromise could actually work, and so the aspirations, one, should be reframed and should be talked about in the right turn, and then the limitations also honestly discussed. But the other thing that it makes me think about is what the possible solutions are to this, and you're indicating that you're feeling that Bernie Sanders' big mistake was not in 2016 starting another party, that in some way what we really are talking about is a two-party system that 100% accepts capitalism as its MO and the central bank as its saving grace, and that in order to have the discussion that you're shocked we're not having, really requires a third party and a third voice. So I agree with those things, but I think it's just interesting to put out there what alternatives or what realities there are, and what the alternatives to the realities might be.
Yeah, and look, I think the point I made back then, I made that point, by the way, back in 2016, because I think quite a few of us here, I supported Bernie Sanders, and I saw in Bernie Sanders a breath of fresh air and a ray of light. The difference with him and Ralph Nader, for instance, right, was that Bernie could have started a third party with a very, very strong national movement behind him. There were all those people that were, fired up and ready to create that party. Nader never had that. Nader was a protest vote. If Bernie had started a progressive movement back in 2016, immediately after the primaries were stolen from him, I think that now we would be talking about a completely different political geography in the United States.
I mean, just to raise this point, I was at a discussion group last night with somebody who has, been very active in the COP26 discussion, the climate change, who is unbelievably optimistic about, Generation Z and the young activists that are in some way the real instigations for a real discussion about what's going on. So that I'm curious to know what you think about being optimistic about the younger generation that's now beginning to talk more honestly about the things that we've been happy to stick our heads in the sand about.
I always make the distinction between hope and optimism. The Gramscian distinction. I am a pessimist who never gives up hope. And one of the things that keeps hope alive, of course, is young people. And while at the same time being realistic. Look, Peggy, like you, I'm sure you have had this experience. I spent decades in academia, teaching young people, benefiting from the energy, being inspired by them. But at the same time, I would be walking down the street of Sydney, of London, of New York, and I would bump into, decades later, into a former student of mine and say, "Oh, Yanis, you taught me back then in that place. It was fantastic. I loved your lectures on Marx and socialism and all that. But Yanis, are you still a left-winger? My God, move on, mate." So, there is this about the youngsters too, right? And since we have youngsters here, all fired up by the prospect of change, okay, just beware of that.
Yes. That's very, very poignant. I want to maybe pivot the discussion a little bit to cities. I think that there is still a kind of implicit bias against cities in the recent infrastructure bill that was passed, in as much as it, there's something, a couple of $1 billion allocated for rural development. There doesn't seem to be comparable provisions made for cities, for example. What do you make of the role of the city in all of this? Because I think that, at least politically speaking, the divide between cities, living here in New York, cities and the countryside in terms of politics is probably greater than the divide between cities across national boundaries. And so I was wondering if either of you could comment on that, and how the city fits into all of this, into how urban politics fits into all of this, which of course I think intersects with questions of inequality and race as well.
Peggy?
I think there are two things. One is, I think they know that cities are run by developers, and so it's a territory that they don't know how to make policy around. It just is the case that private property, private developers are dictating what happens and what gets built in the city, and they recognize that. But I would also suggest, maybe this is disagreeing with Nate or elaborating, the divide that you're talking about between cities and the rural or the suburbs, I think is an ideological distinction, and I don't think it's an actual one. And I actually think that our dependency on the kind of supplies and the resources that cities have on the rural are ignored and absolutely crucial. So it's not the case that the money is going to a place that ignores cities. It's going to a place that actually supports cities, but I don't think it's being acknowledged in the right way, or describing the problem in the correct way.
If I may, I'm not the expert on that, but there are two links between the way in which cities develop and the macroeconomic situation, as well as the technological reality. The process I described previously on the impact of the Fed on the financial system is crucial for cities. I've just come back from Berlin, and it's clear in Germany, for instance, that the flood of central bank money into the financial systems, which is fueling share prices, it's creating immense wealth that has nowhere to be invested. So if wealth doesn't have anywhere to be invested, it's going to go into bricks and mortar. And that is going disproportionately to increase house prices in the dense city areas. So, using the capacity, the money tree, the Fed and the Central Bank of Europe and so on, not in order to help the financial markets decouple even further from really existing society, is also going to have an effect on our capacity to maintain social control over the cityscape. And secondly, we need to, I don't know what the answer to the question is. Peggy may enlighten me or us. The effect of digitization on the structure of the city. That is, I remember reading back in 1970 something, it reveals my age, a fantastic article in Monthly Review by Paul Sweezy entitled Cars and Cities, in which he maps out beautifully the way in which the policies favoring Detroit altered suburbia and altered the city center and so on. Now, what effect is digitization? Electric cars, different ways of the electrification of transport going to have on cities. That's something that we cannot allow Uber and Tesla to determine for us.
Thank you. A lot of our students, obviously, I think, are going to be wondering about how to make a difference. And Yannis, you made this very, I think, important point about the pragmatism that will tend to set in among the students you've worked with. But maybe you can talk about both of you can talk about your own activist work in recent years?
Becky,
Yanis, you go.
you want to go first?
No, you
Happy.
go.
Okay. Well, look, it's not pragmatism, Nader. I believe in the good life. I want to have fun in life. I want to have a happy existence. I just don't think that these students who went and worked for Goldman Sachs and who look at me scornfully because I'm still a left-winger are leading a good life. I think they are, just wasted in the English tradition, not the English-American tradition. They are sad bastards. So don't be sad bastards, folks. Just try to do whatever makes you really genuinely happy. And I think that, being an activist, while at the same time being financially comfortable, I'm comfortable. I'm privileged. I don't need to work for Uber, but I don't have much money. But who gives a damn? I wake up in the morning and I'm very keen to do what it is that I'm doing. And I'm doing, I write, I read, I do a little bit of politics. I write an article for a newspaper for a little bit of money. It's great fun. Imagine working for Goldman Sachs. My God, you might as well kill yourself. Don't think that there is a distinction between pragmatism and idealism. Don't think that there's a distinction between the good life and the martyr, the life of the martyr. No, nobody should be a martyr. Everybody should lead a good life, but define the good life in your own sense, in the ancient Athenian, ancient Greek sense of eudaimonia, of a successful life, not be a guinea pig on a treadmill, running faster and not getting anywhere.
Please.
What I appreciate about what Yanis is saying is that students, architects, people should think of their whole subjectivity together. One of my feelings about architecture students is that, and architects is that they compartmentalize. It's like, this is what architecture makes me do, and this is the system that it goes in. And then, by the way, I'm a liberal and I vote, this way, and I might even, vote for Bernie Sanders. And there's just total compartmentalization that what their 40, 80-hour week is in their life has nothing to do with what they actually believe in, and that they're not putting it together. It's just like, so yes, we have to sleep with ourselves at night, and yes, that doesn't mean sacrificing, creature comforts. But to speak, kind of directly to the architecture students here, my work and the work of the Architecture Lobby, which is the activist group that I've been participating in, is really against our idea of being exceptional. We're exceptional because we're visionaries. We're exceptional because we're aestheticians. We're exceptional because we're socially conscious and we have a historical sense and precedent and blah, blah, blah. We're exceptional. And my feeling that we shouldn't be surprised that if we think we're exceptional, we're also marginalized. That's what the definition is, marginalization. And that marginalization is both why we are badly paid and why we suffer, but more importantly, or connectedly, that marginalization is why we are not at the table when the important decisions are being made about the built environment. We're just not. We're decorating what developers decide to do, beginning and end of story. And so we need to change, one, that narrative, and two, the education, and three, the practice of architecture, so that we actually do more than decorate other people's ideas. That's what I think my activism and the Activism Architecture Lobby is about. And, again, we can talk about all the things that need to happen in education to change, ideologically, theory-wise, history-wise, professionally. It just needs to be a totally different discipline.
What about economics as a discipline? I mean,
you really want to know?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you said it today or if I heard you say it online, talking about the Chicago School culture that
Not
tends
just
to
the
exist?
Chicago school. It's not just the Chicago school culture. It's the whole of the economist culture, including some of the left wing, I must say. Because you see, we economists are the queens and the kings of the social sciences. So take any university, anywhere in the world, and look at the budget of the economics department and compare it to the budget of the anthropology or the sociology or the politics department. It's 10 times as much. Why? Because we have managed since the 1860s, 1870s, in Europe primarily, and then in the United States, to convince academic authorities and the world and society that we are scientists. We are the true scientists of society, and the rest are just blah, 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 right? We use mathematics, very high-powered mathematics. If you want to study economics, at Stanford or NYU, you have to be a mathematician, effectively, who abuses mathematics. That's what you need to do. And it's economists have nothing to do with Adam Smith or David Ricardo, the classical economists, the ones who kicked off economics and made it a very interesting way of understanding capitalism. Whether they were from the left or from the right, it didn't matter. They were not pretending to be scientists. They were, economic historians. They were trying to make sense. They would say, okay, what's this thing called capitalism? How does it unfold? They looked at it as an organism that had different layers, different social classes, different categories like capital, labor, and so on, and tried to talk about the distribution of income, what proportion of the surplus of the pie goes into investment, who gets the property rights over the returns to this investment, and so on and so forth. And then, these people were not in the universities, none of them. And if they were in the universities, they were by accident. So Adam Smith was in a university because he was a philosopher, but no, he was never an economist. And when he wanted to write economics, he had to resign from the University of Glasgow and to become the private tutor of a stupid rich boy, right? And so economics enters academia only when it emulates, it copies the thermodynamics model of Newtonian physics. And then suddenly, because very few people can understand Newtonian thermodynamics in Congress, in the press, and so on, suddenly, as somebody who speaks about the economy, about unemployment, inflation, poverty, in terms of of differential equations, suddenly you can't have a conversation with them because you don't understand what the hell they're going on about. So one economic concept that academic economists understand is monopoly. And they understand that if you manage to say that which everybody understands in a language that no one understands, then suddenly you have power over them. So economics, whether you are left, Marxist economics, it's unbelievably ridiculous. And I'm saying this as a Marxist and somebody who appreciates Marxist economic models. But the moment you start trying to turn capitalism into a system of equations, you lose capitalism. Because the nuances of capitalism, the dialectics of capitalism, the fact that labor is two things at once. It is a commodity and it's an activity. You cannot put this in an equation. An equation is only a quantity. It cannot put in there equality. So the moment you try to mathematize economics, you do two things at once. You elevate your status within academia and you get all the money, whether you're left wing or right wing, doesn't matter. Okay? And you become irrelevant to capitalism. None of what you do is connected to capitalism. It's connected to an alternative universe, which doesn't exist really exist in capitalism, right? So I call this the most peculiar failure, in the sense that it's an inverse Darwinian process. The less capable your model is of understanding capitalism, the greater your rewards in academia. And then, because you have power in academia, you are the professor of economics at Harvard or whatever, Yale, okay, you get to advise Goldman Sachs or Joe Biden. And then you have the revolving doors. And then your department gets a lot of dough because you advise those who run real economies by means of models that have no connection to real economies. Okay? So in the end, you end up with a priesthood. It's a religion with equations and a lot of statistics, but no science. So as you can imagine, I'm not my profession's favorite son.
Thank you for your candor there. I have a follow-up question for both of you. In the principle of hope, I believe, Ernst Bloch, sorry, Peggy.
I just want to talk about the economic thing too. Sorry, which is, that meta description, which I find very interesting, both about economics and economics within the university system, is architecture is so far beyond, or so far beyond that kind of discussion, which probably should be happening. But just to say, at our realm, we're not teaching economics at all. And that's part of what needs to happen in architecture education, is to really understand the economics of what we're participating in. What is the supply chain? What is the labor force? What monies are we participating in every possible way? What it is that the materials that we're calling upon, the neighborhoods that we're interacting with. We have zero education about that. And so at the most fundamental economic level, we're not talking about it. And so I would just be arguing for description, let alone the analysis, Yannis, that you're just pure would be really, really helpful in our discipline.
Absolutely.
Sorry. Yeah,
No,
I
absolutely.
think Peggy, your work has been very inspiring for me, because I think that someone who works as an architect for a living, we're kind of has a bad name. In other words, like you've sort of critiqued the idea of looking at architecture as a labor of love alone, precisely because that kind of rhetoric has been used to exploit the labor of young, very idealistic workers. Can you or either of you perhaps comment on that?
I mean, I'll just say quickly, because I do want to hear what Yana says about this, that there is a relationship between our willingness to be badly paid or not paid, and to think that we're holy for not being paid, and our marginalization. It just is the case. And so the fact that we think we're outside of that world is exactly why developers don't want to hear from us, and why the public doesn't believe in us. It's self-fulfilling that not identifying as workers means that we're just dismissed within the larger system that makes decisions. So anyway, Yannis.
No, I agree with you, but at the same time, identifying as workers, I mean, we are workers, you are workers, architects are workers, but I think that the left, allow me to just go off at a little tangent, a short tangent. I think the left must stop worshipping labor, paid labor. This is one big mistake that we've made. Remember, full employment was something that the right wanted. They wanted everybody to be members of the proletariat, right? And suddenly, we instead of talking about prosperity, we're talking about full employment. Full employment, it doesn't matter how poorly paid and how terrible the circumstances of one's work might be, is supposed to be a good thing, full employment. And I do believe that it's about time that, we celebrated the fact that youngsters, architects or artisans or artists, they want to create, they want to be creative, they want to work without laboring. This is an old William Morris kind of concept of the artisanal creative work that only comes into its own when it stops being, paid labor.
Wait, are you supporting Morris's position?
Yes.
Yannis?
Yes.
So you're no longer an erratic Marxist. You're now a anarchist, old-fashioned social anarchist.
William Morris was an erratic Marxist. I'm completely consistent in my erratic Marxism.
Elaborate, because this is, please, Peggy.
No, I asked for elaboration. That's fine. Go ahead.
Look, I truly take Marx, for instance, right? Remember, Marx never wrote anything about communism. Never. He point blank refused to write about communism. He wrote about capitalism. And then when people ask him, what about communism? Oh, that's something that those who overthrow capitalism will have to create in their own image and according to their own vision. But when he pressed really hard, remember that passage in which he describes the good life, where you wake up in the morning and you read a novel, then you do some pottery at around 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Then you go and do you go fishing. Then you come back and you write a play. And then in the evening, you sit around the fire talking philosophy. That's my view of the good life. And
but we have a big problem in architecture, which is the historical problem of the unpaid internship. This idea that you should be so lucky as to work under the master, unpaid slavery. Or not.
That's slavery, because we for the communist ideal that Marx described to be possible, the means of production must be commonly owned, and we must all be recipients of a basic income, effectively. So, or either that or Star Trek replicator. So, we can just have a hole in the wall and everything that we need comes out of there without our work. As long as we have scarcity, internship is another word for slavery.
I'm dying to go in here because
Please, Peggy, you're the expert.
I'm not an expert, but I think a lot about this because Morris did other things. He also, it wasn't just pottery and philosophy. And he said, and now I will go and be the person who does the ferry crossing, and I will go be the cook. He was not imagining a world without work that's all leisure. He was saying that work, once you are learning from it, once you basically own the means of production, work itself will be satisfying. And this is my beef with the universal basic income and the kind of bullshit jobs. I think jobs actually, if they're done well, and if we have autonomy in it and we participate in it and it's done really, is fine. And so I have no negative connotation with the word labor. Labor is only the fact that it fits into the economy and the equation of the GDP. So the image of a world that's leisure is not one that I'm interested in. I'm interested in one where work itself is creative, and we don't think it's more creative to be an architecture professor than it is to pick up the garbage. Someone's going to pick up the garbage, and that's not bullshit. That's just
absolutely. But to strengthen your point, I remember when I was a very, very young researcher in my early 20s, and to make some money, I was helping with some survey of unemployed people in England. At the time when we had 4.5 million unemployed people in England, I remember there was this stupid questionnaire that I had to ask unemployed people, which was embarrassing. And one of them was, what do you do with your leisure? And an unemployed railway worker turned around and said, mate, there is no leisure if you don't have work. And that really stayed with me. This is along the lines of what you're saying, Peggy. But what I would like is, I would like everybody to be as privileged as I am. I work all day, every day, even into the night, but I don't do it for pay. I don't need to do it for pay. I get paid, which is great. But if one day I don't get any pay for the work I do, I'm still okay. I'm not going to starve. My kids are not going to have a problem. That's why the basic income is important, so that we can do work that is satisfying and also socially useful. Otherwise, you do bullshit jobs that destroy your soul and destroy the planet.
Yes, I mean, we're not going to disagree. I just think that one of the things that gets foregrounded when we accept work, as opposed to we all get to choose our lovely time, is being forced to work with other people, being put into situations that would not be our choosing, that we have totally learned from. I'm skeptical about what it means that if I really chose every day not to do stuff, that I would not be forced to meet with people who I learned from because they're completely different from me. I just think work becomes an arena, again, if we own the means of production, and if of our choosing, to also get into situations that because it's organized beyond the individual, actually benefit the individual. So
Look, I'm not an individualist, but at the same time, I don't believe in forcing people to collaborate. I think that we are genuinely collaborative beings, and given an opportunity, we will coalesce and we will form groups and tribes and working groups and reading groups and book clubs and this and that and the other. To say to somebody who, I have a friend, for instance, who is slightly autistic and a misanthrope. He stays at home and plays music all day. He's a great musician, but he doesn't want to perform for anybody. I don't believe in a society that forces, he's lucky because he's inherited some money. I don't believe that in a good socialist society of the future, this guy should be forced to mingle. But I do believe that the vast majority of people will mingle, even if they don't have to go out there and work for Uber.
Yeah, no, one of the things that I think about is unionization. I think unionization is something that is probably pretty repulsive to most architects, because one implies a class distinction and manual labor and all of those things that are unfortunate. But it also implies that we might have to rub shoulders with other unionists and people of a different class. And it's like, and that's not a problem. We should be rubbing shoulders with those things. And so it just makes me think about, if we're interested in organization, how work is organized isn't always going to be up to our individual choices, and that's fine. We're participating cooperatively in the decisions, and they may not go our way, but we've at least participated. Anyway.
Well, I am not an individualist either, but allow me 2 quick points. The first one is, you reminded me with this argument that circumstances force us to rub shoulders with people we would not have that. We would not have had an opportunity to meet, and that's a great thing. This reminds me of the awful experience I had in the Greek army, where I was conscripted, like all Greek males. A terrible, terrible time. But at the same time, it is true. I got to rub shoulders with boys that I would never have encountered, and I learned a huge amount of that. That doesn't stop me as a politician in Greek parliament struggling for the abolition of conscription. Similarly, unionization is absolutely essential under capitalism, but the whole point of unionization must be to end the class struggle, which is, to take over the means of production, so we don't need unions.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I want to hear from my colleague Hyunte Young. Hyunte Young was also a student activist as a college university student in South Korea, and also my co-moderator.
Yeah, I joined as a co-moderator, but I told Nader, because it's to facilitate communication, I asked him to lead everything, our support. But I have a couple of questions about, being a Korean or strained to the society. Not really. I spent more than 20 years in the States, so I can't say that. But still, Yanis, you talked about, Western country, particularly these really rich countries printing money. And what kind of impact has it had on the poor countries? Vaccine, all these issues on, sometimes when G7 or G20 talk about global agendas, but sometimes they are not really well connected to poor countries. So you see global south, so you might see better than most of us that imbalance, and then what's going to be the main challenges now in the world, not just from advanced country from inside out, but what if you look a little bit away, what's going to be main issues? And that's one question. Also, another question is that you talked about techno-feudalism. I understand, but techno-feudalism is also isn't it also techno-feudalism is not one thing because they are fighting each other too, I guess. Netflix and Amazon, different companies, but is there a way of fight we can intervene, change the situation?
Right. Regarding the first question, the effect of money printing, a tremendous effect, because all this money, the torrent of money that was created by the central banks of the West, a lot of it found its way after 2008 into developing countries, because it didn't have anything to do. There was nothing to invest in, no investment opportunities in the West. because also of the austerity that was imposed upon the people of the West, American workers, European workers, Greeks, Germans, and so on. So a lot of that money flooded developing countries, created huge bubbles, strengthened the local oligarchies, and then at the first sign of trouble, the money rushed out again of the country, the bubbles burst, and that created new conditions of austerity for the masses in developing countries. Regarding techno-feudalism, by the way, for those of you who don't know about my crazy idea, I have this view, and this will be my next book, by the way. There are echoes of this in Another Now, in my novel. I have this view that 2008 was to capitalism that which 1991 was for Soviet socialism, that is its end. And it is a message that the left hates. They hate me for saying that, because for the left, we leftists grew up thinking that we were brought to this world to overthrow capitalism. So if I'm right, we are complete failures because capitalism overthrew itself. It didn't wait for us. And the terrible thing is that instead of giving rise to something better than capitalism, it gave rise to something worse than capitalism, which is a kind of digital neo-feudalism. If you think about feudalism, it was fraught with war and with clashes between different feudal lords. Yeah, that's what we have now. So there's no, techno-feudalism is not stagnant and it is not peaceful. It is conflict-ridden and dystopian. Our job should not be to intervene between them. Our job is to take away the means of production from them. Take Facebook away from Zuckerberg. Just the thought for the day, or a project for this week.
Let me call him.
I heard a very funny story, like among Korean friends, like there are so many OTT, like Netflix and Hulu, all different, companies going into Korea. So like my friend says, the only enemy, the only remaining territory is human sleeping, how to reduce sleep and watch all these TV shows. So that's like
they will find a way of commodifying that too.
I have a question to Peggy about, this architecture lobby and how you think of this situation, recently the more and more firms are getting bigger. Recently that Gensler announced their revenue got beyond 1.25 billion almost. So now it has about 6,000 employees, architects, and 50 global offices. So many firms are getting bigger and bigger, and it becomes now not traditional architecture firm anymore. It becomes more conglomerate, it has only different firms inside as well. So somehow unionizing, architects, it's probably getting much harder. They don't really abuse interns, but they pretend to pay. And then many of them also not staying in one location, they're sent to different locations. So these scale getting bigger and the relationship gets much more complicated. How you think of that kind of situation?
It's interesting. There are kind of two different campaigns in lobby. One is cooperativization and the other is unionization. And to make a kind of reductive and ultimately unworkable, but for now it's where we're at, unionization for large firms and cooperativization for small firms.
I'm sorry, Peggy, sorry to interrupt you for just 1 second. I just wanted to, Giannis noted me that he has to step away, and I want to, just be mindful of your time. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And I know it's also late over there. So we're so grateful and honored to have had you.
Well, thank you, Nate. Thank you, Peggy. It was great meeting you. Sorry, I need to leave because I have to go to another meeting.
Of course.
People waiting on another Zoom. Guess what? I have another Zoom.
I can imagine.
Thank you so much for being
Thank you so much.
Bye.
It's an honor.
Thank you, Yanis.
The honor is
We
mine.
hope we get to continue our dialogue.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Please, Peggy.
And so for the unionization efforts, the large firm phenomena is not a problem. I mean, I think part of the difficulty with unionization is, you really do it shop by shop, you do it firm by firm, and the smaller that is, the less impact it has, and the more difficult it is because you have intimate relationships with your bosses. So the large firm phenomena in terms of the unionization effort is kind of interesting. And it, and they do abuse their interns. It's not the case that they begin to operate with HR and with transparency and all the things that you might think come with, working like a business. Then there's cooperativization. Small firms is really how small firms can act like big firms and really stop competing against each other and really perform with expertise of other firms that are in your network. Ideally, these two things, which are compartmentalized by small and large, would all go the way of worker owned and cooperativization, so that even the large firms would be worker owned. So it's not the largeness per se, it is the hierarchy and the business model that's being produced there that is the problem, both at the small scale and the large scale. But just to say another thing about the large firms is that more and more they're large because they're doing things way beyond architecture. They're really just doing everything. Gensler's ideas, we do everything. And so that should lead to a discussion about what is the role of professionalization? What is the role of defining yourselves as an architect when in fact what's making their business model work is your infiltration into other areas and your ability to allow those other expertise to come in. So, again, it's poised there to set a certain set of questions which we're not asking, but are not intrinsically uninteresting.
I want to, in the chat, we have a question from our colleague Jeanette Sordi. She writes, regarding work and purpose and impact on society and the environment. I wonder what you think of corporate social responsibility, or B Corp, as ways to set standards and provide benefits and infrastructures. I don't know what B Corp is. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I don't know. You want me very quickly?
Please.
Yeah, like especially in more developing countries, but also in the US, there are kind of a corporation or association that set standards for companies, and they get qualified if they are green or if they are good to the employers, if they have a positive impact on the planet, as a way to, let's say, I think provide benefits or better quality of work. Beyond what the state regulations would fit, no? And because of that, they might be able to not make profit, so they're considered for profit and purpose. Or in the case of corporate social responsibility, they may get tax breaks if they do this. So I was wondering if, what do you think? No, it's easy to buy into this, and
B Corps are a better model than the regular corporate model. They're not as good as a cooperative model, but so we can say one step in the right direction. And I think if Giannis is here, we could be talking about whether the one step makes sure that we don't do the final step, or whether this is how things work in a slow evolutionary fashion. But certainly, if architecture firms are looking for models that at least indicate their social responsibility and their better labor practices, that is certainly one positive step.
Yeah, I don't know of any office of architecture qualified as that, no, but they're in business, there are several.
I wish I knew where their architects' offices were, and there must be, but I don't know either. So yeah.
Other questions out there, especially from our students? Either, I don't know if they can chime in like by through their mics, or if they need to post questions in the group chat.
Maybe if I can jump in.
Please.
I have a question. So Peggy, thank you for your activism and your comments. I just wonder in relationship to two things, the techno-feudalism, which is actually affecting all of us real time, and the relationship between what you mentioned in terms of cities and who controls the city. And to me, I agree, we need to unionize, we need to create newer models and so on. But one of the questions that I have, and I bring myself all the time to my colleagues, we had actually a techno-feudalism discussion a couple of weeks ago. is what are our real possibilities of political action? And I appreciate that you mentioned the fact that we need to be involved in economics, we need to be involved in politics. But I wonder, since the pressure from the top down is so big and so systematized, the reality of our actions from the bottom up are kind of like insignificant. It's like, the pressure on the individual to, recycle. In the meantime, you have somebody going to, the stratosphere and producing tons of carbon footprint that you will never produce in your entire life, right? So I wonder, what do you think in terms of the means of productions, but also the means of political action in terms of the laws and the regulations that are actually favoring the developers, as you say, or favoring the top down? Because, I've been living in New York for 20 years, and every year is worse. The range of action is limited through the laws that are written from the top down. And in the meantime, we have the AIA that either is complicit or is looking the other way around, or we have architectural associations. We don't have architects. Actually, people that work in the government that do architecture and urbanism, they don't have the curriculum, right? Why are we allowing public service, right, to be able to say that they're doing architecture and urbanism if they are not architects and they're not urbanists? So I wonder, in terms of your idea of union, what do you think about that, the possibilities of action?
I really appreciate the question, and I think in some way, in posing the question, you're hinting at the solution. But there are two things. One is how it is that we organize as a profession, and whether that's the architecture lobby or not. But it's not the AIA, and so I think basically what you're saying is we need to organize in a capacity that isn't yet created. And that really has to do with what I consider to be an ideological shift and whatever, which is not how it is that we can chase jobs, but how it is that we have input in the jobs that need to be done, how we identify them and at the table. But part of it around unionization is that I feel if we're talking about the Green New Deal or climate justice, that nothing's going to be done if we don't change the construction industry. And nothing's going to change the construction industry if we don't actually work with the unions. And no architect is going to affect those construction unions if we're not unionized, And so I'll just say around the issue of unionization, it's really to speak power to power or worker to worker. And this is where I think together, the construction unions and the architecture unions can really fight the developers. Right now they work on that triangulation and that separation. So I think unions are important that way. But the other thing that makes me think about is the work that's being done with the Green New Deal Working Group and the architecture lobby that has just come out with a position paper around Green New Deal and housing, and they were taking legislation that was happening, at the local level and at the federal level, and inserting or qualifying where it doesn't go far enough in terms of understanding how the built environment is actually produced. All because of what you're saying. It's like we're people who are urbanists, planners, urban designers and architects aren't there. And so they're missing certain things. And so they're very, very thorough and very has actually just gone out to politicians and they're getting a response from the legislators. So to me, that's an example where organized activity working very, very intimately with policy proposals can then with intelligence comment on those policy proposals and add to them. So that.
Excellent, thank you.
Excuse me, could you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Bill Schacht. I'm actually working in the Rockaways as an urban designer, community quote organizer, and I think the actual part of the actual solution is because of this sort of post-apocalyptic situation we're in, we get a chance to reform the whole system, and suggest we do it on a more a larger scale and yet a more intimate scale politically, which is the district. So we're working forward after many years trying to get community microgrids, an actual formalized evacuation route from the city. And we're now taking it in the direction of creating what I think is the first New York City special resiliency district. Totally well-defined, and something we can use as a R&D laboratory with the citizens out there who are totally underserved and have gone through some recent sort of, an equation of benefits versus sacrifices in combination. The government hands and takes away. And again, it's controlled by the developers. So we have an opportunity in that particular location, very easily followed, to make progress with true reformation of the whole system. And actually, to me, that's beautiful because it involves, let's say, the profession as we know it historically of urban design, which brings in everything. It expands the architectural realm. And I've been trying to learn out there since my architectural career, things about social, economic, and I'm now going back to my favorite subject, which is cultural, because I'm tired of the 8 years since Sandy out there. We have to get this thing in place and do things on the ground. So I'm sorry for this long interjection, but I wanted to offer that as a hopeful template that we want to move forward on. And we are going to have a conference on this thing, and hopefully all the institutions that deal with our field will be coming together soon on another conference. And you folks are awesome. And I conclude. Thank you.
Let me just say, I mean, I really appreciate that work and what your district is doing, but I really appreciate your bringing up the district as a catchment. I've been doing a lot of research on anarchism and cooperativization and Eleanor Ostrom and how it is that we can co-manage our resources. And it's part of what was behind my comment that was brought up by Nader of cities being overlooked in the package, and that it kind of looks at the rural areas. And my suggesting that those things really need to be looked at together because it's so symbiotic, but in general, the professions and the discourse sees them as distinct. And so the district as something that sits between the city or the locale and the state or the county, but really thinks about it in a I don't know, an economic catchment, and a resource catchment as opposed to a political catchment, I think is really important and really interesting to think about. And maybe part of the process of a ground up rethinking about how to participate in politics and own our resources.
Yeah, and I just want to add one further thing on that is that it's kind of a political bridge. We're not going to be able to totally transform the political process. So we have to work with this structure we have, which is, federal, state, and local. And like they say, politics is still, all politics is local. And that within reason, because here I've certainly confronted this. The controls are first at the federal level, how that gets distributed to the state level, and how that gets down to the community through the state representatives to the local folks who have the local power. It's the system is set up to work, except it's so totally corrupt.
I'm sorry.
And the trickle down theory does not work.
Yeah,
we have to trickle up. I'm sorry.
No, I know. I appreciate it. Thank you for your passion. We have a question from RK. Do you think housing is a human right, Peggy?
Yes, it is.
Pablo agrees. We also have someone who says housing is not a human right.
Okay, let's hear from them.
This is from Frank Lorne. Frank, do you want to chime in, or do you have a mic, or do you want to elaborate? He writes, it's the speculation aspect of housing that made them unaffordable and thus not accessible to many humans. So I think he's saying that it's not that it isn't a human right, it's that they're not human rights, treated as human rights now. Other questions from our audience? Other questions, comments? Peggy, do you want to say anything about the work you did this last summer in education reform?
Yeah, no, thank you. You know, and if part of what Giannis and all of us have been talking about is producing another another subject, you know, or definition of an architectural subject that's not the one we have right now. It starts with education. And so, yes, this summer, the Architecture Lobby had the Architecture Beyond Capitalism School, the ABC school. And its premise was that we need to understand our role within capitalism. And so it was definitely taking on what we have been talking about here is if we don't understand how we play in the economy, we're not going to be able to, one, be in a position to comment on it or to change it. And so it was divided into three different themes. The first was capitalism, the second was labor, and the third was cooperating and you know, communal exchange, each of those being seen as areas that need to be part of an architectural citizens education. So it's going to happen again. It's an ongoing thing. I really appreciate you bringing it up. But
can our students get involved? Do they have opportunities to get involved?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's free. There was a kind of form that people had to put in that had to do with what their background and what their interest was. We had 450 applications and we had to whittle it down to 150, but it's free and really kind of open to anybody whose sincerity about participating in a new solution would be the only vital thing. So yes, I'm going to put that in the chat.
Yeah, please do. Please do. Some of us have to run off to class momentarily, so I just wanted to take this opportunity again, Peggy, to really thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and engage in this conversation, both with us and with Yanis Varoufakis. This was really inspiring, and it gave us so much to think about. And I want to thank you personally for all of the amazing, you know, work you've done and contributions you've made to our profession and our field. For me, you're really a beacon of hope in what can sometimes otherwise feel like a pretty depressing sometimes context. So thank you so much for your work, and we're really you know, looking forward to continuing to follow your career and all of your exciting contributions.
I really appreciate your saying that. That means a great deal. But just to say we're all doing the work, you know, the fact that this has been organized by you and NYIT and the rest of you, that's all part of the work. So we're all in this together.
Great.
And I really, really appreciate your setting this up. It's just so interesting.
Great. Well, we'd love to have you back sometime. Okay.
Thank you
so much.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you
so
everyone
much,
for
Peggy.
joining us. Thank you for all your
Thank you.
contributions.
Thank you, Peggy.